It'll come back when it comes back. So verification. Oh my gosh, I'm getting a call. It's extremely loud in my ear.
Something to get interrupted.
I love it so much.
People, I'm trying to do a podcast here, right? Yeah. So yesterday, of course, last week we had a big class, and the big project we used Alpha Pro Admix for the whole thing, and everything worked fantastic. And we talked more about that last week. And so I took some product home with me that we used, and made some samples, did some flexural tests to verify for quality control, because quality control is an important part of a manufacturer's responsibility. And I'm not through looking at the data yet. I just started, but it's looking fantastic. Like, everything's spot on, exactly what I wanted, exactly what I expect. And that's the hallmark of a quality product, is every time you use it, it does what you expect. Just like your car, you would never buy a car where you get in it and sometimes it runs, sometimes it doesn't. Now, if you buy an old used car that might have that situation, that's one thing. But to buy a brand new car that you're expecting, hey, I'm going for the best. This is the best car I can buy, and sometimes you put the key in it, sometimes it doesn't start, and sometimes it just stops working halfway down the road.
And sometimes the manufacturer sends you new parts that have never been tested just to throw on.
Right, and it maybe doesn't fit, and then says, hey, let's try this, and basically gives you a new car instead. Because the one you bought doesn't work, and that's supposed to fix everything, and it doesn't work either. That's not making good decisions.
Well, so what were your tests like, and what were the numbers you were getting? Like, what was the? I mean, I know
like I said, I just started. I got when I cast panels, I cast one single sample, and then I cut it up into 6 samples. That's the ASTM test for that. So of those 6 coupons, 3 are tested right side up, 3 are tested upside down, to make sure there's no bias in terms of, if you had segregation, for instance, all the fibers would sink to one side, and you'd get a lot of,
you'd have a major bias.
There'd be a noticeable, seesaw effect or sawtooth effect in the strength. And like I said, I literally just started doing this morning, so I don't have that many data points. But of the 3 tests that I've analyzed, so peak flexural strength 1611, 1621, and 1441. So far, so good.
Nice.
Right?
That's great.
That's exactly
awesome.
what I would expect. To me, anything like around 1400 is good. There's another point that I think is really important, and this is true, and it kind of goes back to curing. Of course, here in North Carolina, we're soundly into winter months, as evidenced by Caleb's garb. I'm in my office where it's nice and warm.
Listen, it's 25 Fahrenheit outside right now. So not warm.
In my test facility, of course, I've been doing this for quite a while. In the summer, I actually had the air conditioning on. I have air conditioning in my little shop, in my test lab shop, which is very nice.
In the lab, Jeff, that's what we're calling it. It's the lab.
It's the lab, yeah. It's not super sophisticated in the sense that it maintains plus or minus half a degree. No, it doesn't. It's not that. I keep it to where it's bearable, and I've tried to keep my shop at around 78 degrees in the summer, which is just a touch over 77, which is 25 degrees centigrade. So let's call it 26 degrees centigrade for the metric folks out there. So it's not unbearable, unless you happen to live in Scotland or something like that, where it's or Sweden, where 15 is hot.
Oh man, I know. Yeah.
So anyway, I've because I'm doing tests in the winter, I want to be able to directly relate my results to my summer results. So I've actually cranked the heat in my shop and gotten it to be basically summertime temperatures in my shop in the winter. Of course, my heating bill is going to be crazy, but I'm only doing that, whenever I'm, casting and curing and testing. So it's not crazy.
Right.
You know, it's not like I'm, you know, heating a huge shop like yours for weeks on end. All that
Yeah,
being
it's
said
nice and
is when your concrete is cold and you don't do anything about that, your strength gain in the long term, like we're talking 28 day, 56 day, 90 day, your
yeah,
concrete's going to be very strong. But your 1 day, your 2 day, your 3 day strength is going to suffer immensely because the
right.
chemical reactions that create the glue that holds everything together go much slower when it's cold. That's why we put food in a refrigerator to preserve it. The
Right.
bacterial decay, which is kind of gross to think about, slows down a lot. And when you get down near like below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, it doesn't shut down, but it slows down incredibly more than if it, you know, at room temperature. So that's why you don't leave food out on the counter overnight and then eat it the next day. If your concrete is cold, what's it doing? It's just sitting there. It's nearly dormant. That's why we use ice in our concrete. And it is true that concrete generates its own heat. It's exothermic as it reacts. It's part of the reaction. And that heat can accelerate things and help move things along, right? And that's why it's important to first cover your
Apologize
pieces
for
in
my camera. I'm not sure what's happening with my
he's
camera,
having
so I turned it
internet
off.
flaky stuff. I can't see you now, but we can hear you.
Well,
And you just
we can hear me. I'm working on the camera. You can hear me. I'm
everything's
working on the
cold
camera.
there.
Yeah, that's right.
So when, you know, obviously when you're done casting your pieces, you need to cover them in plastic. Hey, you're back with your scratch camera, but
I'm
it's fine. We
back
can
with the
see
wrong camera, and I
you.
can see my iPhone camera, and it's not letting me select because we're recording.
Yeah.
I don't know why it switched or when it switched or what made it switch, but here we are.
So as I was saying, you cover it in plastic, and then it's important to cover it in blankets to trap that heat. And it's exactly the same as if you're laying in bed and your room's cold, right? Unless you like the cold, you're going to want to cover up with lots of blankets. Your concrete wants lots of blankets, but blankets don't create heat. Blankets only hold in the heat that the concrete makes. And if your concrete is really cold, it's going to take a long time for that chemical reaction to start making heat. And you have to also think about when are you going to demold. Let's say your ideal time frame is to demold 24 hours after casting. Realistically, it's probably going to be closer to 16 hours, but let's say 16 to 24 hours. If it takes 12 hours for your concrete to start to make heat, and that heat peak, like I have a data logger that can measure temperature and humidity at whatever interval I want. And you know, it'll take probably 4, 5, 6 hours before it starts to really climb. And then once it starts climbing, because it's making its own heat, and the blankets that I use multiple heating blankets. I actually use a reflective layer, kind of like it's that bubble wrap foil reflective insulation, just to reflect the radiant heat off the concrete back down into the concrete. So if it takes, you know, 12 hours for that heat to start, and that heat peak, right, where it's climbing, it peaks, it stops making temperature on its own, and then it starts cooling off. That whole peak window, call it a little mountain, maybe that's 6 hours long or wide. All right, so that peak might occur around 14, 15 hours. Well, if you demold at 16 hours and it took 12 hours to start making heat, you're barely getting any advantage of that heat. So I guess the point, what I'm saying is, if you're in a cold shop, do what you can to warm up the environment. Either have overhead radiant heat like you have, and a lot of folks, and this is known in the concrete industry, is to use some sort of heating element to warm, you know, heating blankets. For years, I've used just, go to Target, go to Walmart, go to wherever, get an electric heating blanket for your bed. Now, when you start mixing electricity in with concrete, you need to be careful. So put 2 layers of plastic over your concrete to make sure there's no condensation that can get to that electric blanket. And a lot of newer ones only stay on for about 10 hours, but that's okay because that concrete's going to start making its own heat. You just need to kind of kickstart things. So cover it in plastic, cover it in that blanket, cover it with some more insulation. Go to a thrift shop, get some old quilts, get some moving blankets, do whatever, and put as many as you can on your concrete to hold that in. Because if you come in the next day and you put your hand on the outside of your blankets and it feels warm, you're losing heat. You're losing all that free energy to make your concrete stronger. And it makes a big difference. It really does. I've done tests where I didn't do anything, and then I did the same exact thing with modest heat, and which simulates summertime temperatures. And there's a big difference. You could easily lose 20-30% of your strength just because it's cold. And that makes the difference between being able to flip a piece and go, cool, we're good, we're all set, versus doing the exact same thing, flipping the piece, and all of a sudden it cracks because you mishandled it because your concrete wasn't strong enough. And that's kind of the point I'm trying to make here, is that think about what's going on in your environment. You can't just assume that the concrete's always going to be the same, because concrete, just like sealers, just like everything else, just like us humans, we're affected by temperature. And to know what that temperature effect does and how to control that. It's a point I wanted to bring up.
One thing that I'll note too is time, or like size, because like I cast late last night. I finished about 10 o'clock, and so it won't be it won't be 12 hours until 10 o'clock. But these pieces are small, so like it's tables and bases, and the table bases are thick.
Yeah.
The tabletops are 1.5 inches. They're warm. They're apparently
that's another good point, is when you cast a
small
more massive piece. Yeah, there's more mass, less surface area to radiate that heat, so it's going to really the thicker the piece, it's going to feel much hotter.
But also, I'm thinking about like, if the tabletop's a 24-inch round, like it's not going to hurt it to flip it at 12 hours, even if you do,
Right. It's not going to flex. It doesn't need a lot of strength because it's picking it up and handling it impose very low stresses.
Right.
No low stresses. You don't have to have high strength to be able to move it. But like those big panels we cast last, bit different story. Very different story. That's 11 millimeters.
16 hours. Which, by the way, we just, as we generally do, we just got into it. But welcome to those of you who are going to be listening. And I did want to, like, if we could, Jeff.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Last week we used almost all of them. Yeah, no, it gets back to, we always circle back to fundamentals and understanding and being aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and the implications of the choices you make. And this will flow into where you want to go with this conversation is, at the very heart of what we do is we have a vision. Our customers have a vision. We interpret that vision. We make it real. And we create a product that is a culmination of both their vision, our talent, our skill, and the limits and possibilities of our material.
Right.
So we can't just, I can't have a vision and say, hey, I'm going to make a concrete hot air balloon. That's a nice fantasy. We could draw little pictures and maybe do some animations on a computer, but in reality, there's certain things we just can't do. On the other hand, some of the things we can do today are they weren't possible 20 years ago. They weren't possible like when I got started doing this. They weren't possible when, the grandfathers of this industry, Buddy Rhodes and Futong Chang, when they were crafting pieces out of concrete as sculptural elements, as personal projects, as something that was just an expression of their creativity and their vision. I kind of describe that sort of concrete as conventional or ordinary, and from a lot of the creative makers' perspective in this craft concrete industry, is it's primitive. Um, Stuff that comes out of the back of a truck is perfectly suited for the applications it's designed for. But when you start to use it in different directions, making, well, like those thin wall panels we did, that would be impossible to do on the scale and the size and the aesthetics and the time frame of the pieces that we made. So the things we do, our creative vision and the possibilities of where we can take this material has been driven over the last 20-25 years by the material and the technology behind it.
Yeah, and so I wanted to touch on a couple of also, again, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties of my camera switching mid podcast, and my computer won't let me switch it back. Apparently, it says you cannot switch while it's recording, so you're stuck with different casting techniques. I mean, I started with wet cast, unreinforced, just sand mix concrete. It was polymer modified. Now, there were times when I was using the wrong polymer because I didn't know which one to use. I was told I could use like a Acrobond, like a lamb.
Right. Yeah, and I bet that was really foamy.
And again, those were not things I was paying attention to when I was first into it. I wasn't like, I didn't know all of these things. I thought that was what I was supposed to do, and so that's what it was supposed to be.
You know what you know, you know what you don't know, but you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's so
always
fascinating to think about.
You don't know that gets you.
It's not related, but it reminded me of a funny quote. I used to watch Top Gear. I watch Grand Tour. And Jeremy Clarkson is one of my favorite TV personalities. But it occurred to me, and I will relate this, I promise. But he said he had a quote. And it occurred to me that when you're relying on, here's how I'm relating it. When you're relying on your mix ingredients, when you're relying on other people's essentially products to maintain and business changes, or the material changes, the performance changes, whatever the case may be, that suddenly becoming stationary. So that's my relating it, but it's a funny quote. But yeah, so used to be all, just thing. Pieces were heavy as heck. And then we went to GFRC, and it's all about making things as light as possible. So, spray and hand layup was the way that I was taught. Nobody was really doing inner forms at the time. And then, 3, 4, 5 years ago, it started to become kind of a trend to do, an inner form. or became popular. I mean, I think all of these things were always a thing, right? But, you know, became popular, and then direct casting became popular. And now it seems to me that the trend is going back to no face coat. We're just going to dump this full thickness and call it a day, because it's faster. Which is interesting.
There are a lot of, yeah. There are trends, might even call it like fashionable trends, where, you know, somebody gets online and says, "Hey, I'm doing this," and then it's fad, right? But there's some practical elements to why something is popular. Let's take direct casting as a good example, because it kind of highlights, and this is something that I've always said in class, is the most efficient and the quickest way of casting from a production sense is wet casting or direct casting. And by those terms, what I mean is you have a mix that's uniform, right? There's no separate face coat or anything like that. It's just the main body of everything. And you make it very fluid, and you cast it in a mold that contains that and creates, the mold does the whole shaping, and all you're doing is filling the mold full of concrete, right? That is the most efficient way. And it's the most efficient production method because, and by this I mean, you already have the mold made. It's on the shelf, you pull it down, maybe you have 4 or 5 of them,
and you walk away.
You dump concrete, maybe you vibrate it, maybe you tap it, whatever, and it goes off to cure. And it's lather, rinse, repeat. That is the most efficient way to do it. And you can create concrete that does that. I mean, heck, you can make that kind of concrete out of a truck. It's not unique to one kind of concrete. Making self-consolidating concrete is fairly easy. It's certainly not something that anybody can whip up with just a couple ingredients. You do have to know how to stabilize your mix so it doesn't segregate and create the fluidity and get the right kind of viscosity and all that. So there's a little bit of tinkering and a little bit of knowledge necessary in concrete mix design and in the mechanics of stuff, right? But I don't want to get too pedantic here. But it's certainly not unique to one kind of mix or one product. It's pretty well known. I mean, heck, it's easy to do with the right stuff. But that kind of approach, I mean, you just did it last night. We were talking before we got online. It's like, yeah, I went into the shop and I cast 700 pounds of concrete by myself in,
start to finish, including weighing,
and clean up.
2 hours and 15 minutes.
Hours. Yeah. Easy peasy.
So that's great, right? It's
and that approach lends itself to what you were making, right? The look you wanted, the way you were casting it, the size of the pieces, the shapes of the molds, all that. Now, another example, and this is a little hard because I don't have any, I didn't prepare for this, so I would have to dig, and I don't want to waste your time. So having you watch me dig through my thousands and thousands of photos to look for this. But a few years ago, we made a large concrete sofa in class. There's actually 2 pieces, a left side and a right side. And we did it direct cast. And the reason why we had to do it direct cast was the shape of the mold and the complexity of the mold were such that, in the back, the part that you lean up against, the distance between the back of the front of the couch, my back, and the back of the couch against the wall was like maybe 6 inches, maybe 8 inches wide. And it was so deep, it was so tall, like my arm wouldn't reach, my fingertips would not reach the bottom of the mold, which would be the top of the couch, right? So if A, there'd be no way to get a hopper gun in there to spray a mist coat, and B, even if I could somehow, there'd be no way to get, my hands down in there to hand pack. So, you could say, well, just use the big sprayer because you have the pump sprayer. Maneuvering that down in there, you don't have the standoff distance. The nozzle would be bumping up against stuff. It'd be too close. It wouldn't really work. So in that instance, that shape, we had to build an inner mold. And, I think we talked about this in another one. It took like a day and a half just to build the inner molds because it was so complex. We used 10 sheets of melamine for the molding in and out. It was a lot of mold work. And that's kind of the point here is that shape that we chose could only be direct cast because of the limitations of, getting in there and getting the concrete in there. So that basically forced us to make two very complex molds, a big well-braced outer mold and a very complex braced inner mold that had to be in sections to be able to take apart as we demolded it. That's a lot of work. I mean, that took a lot of time. So the time saving of direct casting was completely overshadowed by the large expense of time and material in building the forms.
But again, sometimes that's what you got to do.
You had to do that. That's what you had to do. But if you don't have to do that, maybe sometimes it's just simpler to use another method. So I think the moral of the story, I'm going to let you take over, is all casting processes, all casting techniques are valid and appropriate. And sometimes different ones are better choices than other ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's validity in all of them. For instance, the couch kind of had to be direct cast with an inner form. Now, it was a lot of work. Could we have hand laid it up? Maybe. It would have been awful. And I have ways that I've done. Hand pressed situation or a hand packed situation on that couch, I would have made everything except the back. I would have left the back two corners off, and I would have sprayed everything and troweled it, do a face coat and then get out the backer gun, and I would have sprayed the whole thing, troweled it up to 3/4, and then laminated the back together. So two-person thing though, we want to be able to show it. So I mean, and it also that takes forever. I did these banquettes, 10-foot concrete benches basically that I did that way. And at the back it was only like 2 inches thick, and so sprayed it, hand packed it, got it to or troweled it, got it to thickness, poured the back, stood them up, and then the only way to laminate it is to physically pour material down into that void to get up past. And those casting days are 10, 12 hours. So you've got to consider in studio. I choose to make inner forms 9 times out of 10, even on countertops, because at the end of the day, when I get done, I'm saving time. I'm saving my fingers too, because when I'm, grab the piece to carry it, I don't have all these rough fibers touching me and cutting me and all that. So in my production studio, I feel personally, but then also, I've changed methods. I used to foam core all my edges because it was less concrete, so I was saving weight. Well, I recently, a year or two ago, decided, okay, that doesn't make any sense because I'm spending more money on foam than I would on concrete, and the extra 100 pounds isn't going to kill anybody. So I started just casting.
Or just use your old formwork to create an inner, we'll call it a ring. It's not round.
An inner ring inside. It's 5 extra minutes. Now, in the case of the couch, it was hours and hours and 10 sheets of melamine. It was crazy. But generally, I choose to make an inner form. There are challenges to all of these things. There's folks who like to cast upright and trowel it. I know Brett Carragher did that a fair amount.
Yeah.
I am going to prefer to cast everything upside down. If you're a concrete finisher, though, and you're really good at that, that might be something you do. I've seen Josh Thiel do it on a major island in the Caribbean. That was awesome.
Let's take our lounge chair as an example. There's the way we cast it is basically upside down, inverted casting. We spray a mist coat, which provides a lot of creative options. More options from a pattern standpoint. I've done polka dots, I've done stripes, I've done inlaid mosaic on it.
Yeah, that
done,
I think is the
what was that gradient?
Yeah, I think sprayed is the most
was
versatile.
the gradient that we did
where we kept adding pigment to it. It was the lounge chair.
Yeah,
the green lounge chair.
That was really cool. Yeah. So, we spray a mist coat largely for the aesthetics, and we've done the color burst through it too, and the imprinted handprint on it. That's really an aesthetic choice.
I think spraying is the most versatile casting method in regard to finishes.
Yeah. So we cast it that way because the design of the lounge chairs, it's only 1.25 inches thick. It's 3 centimeters thick, and structurally, and this is the advantage of being a structural engineer, is I can do this, is I can design the thing to be as thin as practical and yet be strong. But to make it that thin, we have to laminate scrim into it.
I wonder what is the practical minimum? Like, what is to sit call it 200-pound person? I'm 215 pounds. So
right.
So to in theoretical minimum, not production. I'm just curious, like what would hold me?
Well, I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to open up my giant calculator that I've created. You have to start also looking at, in a lounge chair, I don't know, I don't have a picture one, but there's the back that you lean on, and then your butt sits on the bottom of it, and then it kind of humps up, and your legs and your knees kind of drape over the hump. Well, there's 2 areas that are high stress areas. So if you're sitting and you lean back, or if somebody grabs the back of it and pulls, right, the inside face against your back, that face is in tension. So that's one area.
Yeah.
The other area is the hump. So that's a great place to sit down because it's a little higher. You're trying to sit down in the chair, you sit on that and you kind of slide down into the chair itself. So we'll take the hump. So the distance between where the bottom of the seat touches the ground, or a base, if you will, depending on how it's made and supported, and where the toe is, that distance. Okay, that span. If that span is really short, then the stresses are a lot lower than if the span is long. I can't remember what mine is. I think we'll use, for sake of argument, 42 inches. It could be less, it could be more, but I think 42 inches is pretty good. It's probably closer to 36, but I'm just going to use 42. And our chair is about 22 inches wide. So if you make a wider chair, it's going to be a little bit different than something else. So right now, at 1.25 inches, I got to take out some of the. I can do like a C-channel shape. I can do foam coring. I have to set these elements to 0. All right, if you had a 300-pound person, or a 200-pound person holding a 100-pound child, let's say, or 2 people sitting on that one spot.
Maybe a 100-pound dog, a lap dog,
A lap dog, sure. Or 2 people back to back. I don't know. There's different ways you could look at it. All right, the flexural stress is getting a little high. It's 580 psi, but that's well under like the practical limit of rupture of good concrete, like our concrete. I've seen other concretes that are on the market that would kind of, I'd be a little worried with, especially if it's only a couple days old. But for this, 500. So let's just use a practical upper threshold of like 700 psi, because that's getting, I like to keep my factor of safety to be at least 2. Meaning if it breaks at 1,000, right, I don't want to have anything more than at 500 psi. If it breaks at 1,400, like I mentioned this morning, one of the flexural tests, 24-hour tests, was 1400 psi. So I would want maximum flexural stress imposed on that concrete to be no more than 700 psi. So let's use 700 psi as an example. So in this case, 1.25 inches, it's under that. When you add scrim, by the way, it really boosts the strength. Unfortunately, it's not something that's easily tested because where that scrim is in the concrete makes a huge difference, and it's kind of hard to control. So we're going to go down to 1 inch thick. So 1 inch thick, just dropping 1/4 inch in thickness. Nothing else changes. The stress just jumped up to 881 psi. So right now, I'm starting to really flirt with that crack, that point of first crack. Now, here's the thing. This is where we had a discussion about strength. I think it was episode 29, a few episodes ago, where we talked about ductile concrete and brittle concrete and how you don't want brittle concrete. And I showed 2 videos of two pieces of concrete. One, UHPC concrete reinforced with PVA fibers, where it was fine, and then it just fractured brittly and unexpected broke in half. And then I showed you a GFRC piece where you had first crack and then it still held together and actually gained strength and it held together, and then you could see it take load a lot longer, right? So if your concrete was brittle, you would have no warning between it being good and fracturing and being in 2 pieces and having somebody fall on their butt, or the whole thing crack, falling in 2. There is no difference between first crack and first failure. Whereas in a good ductile concrete, like a true GFRC type mix, is you might get a hairline crack, but the piece is still holding together. It's still functional. You don't want a first crack, right? But would you rather have a customer say, hey, my chair fell apart, and what does that do to your reputation, versus, oh, we got a small hairline crack? Neither are desirable, but the implications to your reputation are massive.
Right.
All right. If we went down to 3/4, just to really exaggerate things, we would have totally failed. Absolutely fractured in half. 1,520 psi of stress. All right. Now let's go the other way. Let's just make it thick. Thick is easy, but making it thick opens up more casting possibilities. Going from 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches drops it to 1,404 psi. 414 psi. Sorry, I'm not done with my coffee yet this morning. Let's go to 2 inches. 246 psi. That's super easy.
Whatever you want, but you also can't move that. So there's definitely
Oh, absolutely.
There's
that
a trend right now.
A lot more. So it goes from a chair that 2 people can pick up to a chair that needs 4 people to pick it up.
Yeah. I've been noticing a trend where folks, artisans, because again of the ease of casting, are going back to just solid. They're doing SCC GFRC, but they're doing it. I mean, solid. I've seen people casting 2-inch thick concrete. I'm like, y'all. I mean, go for gold if you've got a lot of people and you don't care about installation and you don't care about moving. You're just Mr. Heavy Equipment. Like, that's great, but
and you don't care about the cost of the material.
I can't get there. I mean, if you're like, for me, we're using craft concrete, which is not exactly cheap, and I'm trying to increase my profit margin. And I mean, there are people who are like, oh, well, use the expensive stuff because it's better. And, so your profit will go up because you have less failures. And I think that's a fairly solid line of logic. But then the flip side of that is, okay, let's say for the sake of argument, you got the best concrete in the world and you're paying a premium for it, and that's great. If it's so good, you don't need to cast it solid. You can, take the extra 45 minutes and build inner forms so you don't have to, waste twice the material, because suddenly you've gone from $6 or $8 or $10 a square foot to $20 a square foot, and that ruins,
Yeah. That argument of, well, I'm going to use the best concrete, I'm going to reduce my failures, and that's going to, balance the cost. First of all, you should know how to make good concrete with any kind of concrete and not have failures. So relying solely on the concrete is a little short-sighted because,
Agreed.
20 something years ago, I was making big pieces out of what would be considered primitive concrete.
Crap.
And the greater knowledge of how to reinforce it and how to handle it, that's how you prevent mistakes, not relying on product.
Somebody, I was talking to somebody, this is a week or so ago, and, I told him, I was like, look, the understanding of the material that I've gained over the years, this is not a tooting my own horn or anything like that, but, I've spent a lot of time, Jeff, you've mentored me, like I've done a lot of research, I've had a lot of experience. And so my understanding of how the material works and what it's doing is guiding and driving the kind of quality concrete that I make. And I told this person, I said, look, I use Alpha because I believe it to be the best concrete. It's demonstrably the strongest GFRC admix on the market. And I believe it to be the best, from a surface quality and a strength, ease of use, cost. I mean, all of it makes total business sense to me. So I'm going to use it because I believe it to be the best. That being said, I have absolutely made quality pieces and quality concrete with just about every mix design on the market. And that's not down to the materials, that's down to the maker. And so if you as an artisan don't understand your material, you're doing yourself a massive disservice just trusting blindly in, something that may not fail you, but your knowledge might at some point. And so always be learning, always be trying to understand deeper the material that you use to make a living for your family.
It's like the difference between learning how to paint and be an artist and develop your own talents and learn how to, blend your own colors and work with different, the differences between oil paints and acrylic paints and this, that, and the other thing. I'm not an artist, so I'm only peripherally aware of, the very gross differences between different paints, but there's a lot of subtle differences. Even the grades of paint, whether it's, student grade paint versus professional artist grade paint. There's a difference between that and really, putting in the time, learning all the things there are to learn about application process. There's that versus painting by numbers, having somebody else give you everything you need and all you do is follow their instructions. Are you really an artist? Are you really an expert if all you know how to do is open a bag and add water and dump it in a box? You got to step up your game if that's all you're doing, because you're so limiting yourself. That doesn't mean you're not creative. That doesn't mean you don't have that potential. But if all you know how to do is what somebody else tells you, and you don't know how to manipulate the material that you're building your craft on, who's really holding you back?
Yeah. Well, it occurred, in the knowledge of understanding materials, I had a situation a few years ago where somebody wanted a terrazzo with a red aggregate, red glass, specifically shiny or reflective red glass, which not findable unless you coat it in silver. Silver coated red glass, findable, but it's not like tempered glass where it kind of shimmers and refracts. And I was talking to my mom, who is an artist in a number of mediums. She paints, she has made glass beads, she's a jeweler. So, metals and glass and paint, she very much understands. And so I was talking to her and I was like, I need to find reflective red glass. And she was like, well, you're probably not going to find it. And if you do find it, it's really expensive because in order to make red glass, they have to use gold.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I did not know that. And so again, had I understood the material that I was trying to work with, I would have known that ahead of time and been able to find a workaround. Now I ended up finding a workaround by buying red glass that was coated in silver. Heritage Specialty Glass out in Utah sells it. It's great.
Yeah.
So that gave me the reflective nature that I wanted and the red glass that I needed. But I spent hours looking for red reflective, glass. Couldn't be done. So, not reflective. There's the word I'm looking for, where it shimmers and shines like I guess it's reflective, refractory, whatever.
It's reflective, yeah.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, if you take crushed clear glass, like there's two major manufacturers of terrazzo, recycled terrazzo glass in the United States. They're both out of Utah. There's American Specialty and Heritage Glass. I've worked with Heritage Glass for 20-something years. They both make similar products.
And they're great.
But they each have their own kind of specialty thing. And
Heritage has the silver coated thing.
Heritage has the silver. So they take their crushed glass and then they coat it in basically mirror coating. So if you look at it, you get it, bag of this stuff, it kind of looks silvery gold because they put a lacquer coating over it. But when you cut through it and you grind it, the inside of the glass is whatever color you want and it's transparent. And so the light reflects off the inside of the mirror coating on the outside of the glass. So no matter how it's oriented in your concrete, it shimmers, it reflects that light, it has a little sparkle to it, which is exactly what you want. Otherwise, a lot of times, crushed glass, especially if the particles are smaller, they don't have the facets that reflect light that well. You'll see the color, of course, and you'll see that it's transparent, but it doesn't have any kind of shimmer to it. So it's kind of nice to use once in a while. It can be a lot if there's
a lot of. I love terrazzo. Yeah. It's a lot of work. I've actually got a client right now that wants me to do a terrazzo, like traditional terrazzo, so with stone instead of glass. I mean, there's some glass involved, but the mix they've chosen is all stone marble things. So excited about that, getting those samples, going.
Get your grinding chops.
Get my grinder out. I know. I really wish there was a way to augment that. I mean, it's like I really have wondered, Jeff. I'm like, okay, could I acid etch like a 1-to-1 and cut down on the grinding? Like pull it out of the mold
you're still gonna have to mill the surface.
Oh, I know that, but like, could I get down to glass or close to it by acid etching the crap out of it first? I don't know.
You'd go through a lot of acid. Make a sample, try it. Make a sample and try it.
I think I will. But yeah, I mean, back to what we were talking about, and this is something that we try really hard to do in our workshops is exemplify different casting techniques. If all we did in our workshop, let's say we had a fundamentals workshop, and all we did was say, here's our mix, dump water in it in your mixer with this much plasticizer, you're going to get a really fluid something, and then dump it in here, and that's your thing. Sorry, but that's not giving you much information to go on. So what we really try to do.
All apologies to Betty Crocker, but that's a Betty Crocker cake mix you buy in the grocery store, and that becomes your cooking show. It's like, is that
this
really,
ain't a cooking show,
guys? What's that showing you? I mean, I could watch a video and do that. So
right,
I don't need to go to
this ain't a cooking show. We want to give you tools that you can use in a variety of different methods and ways, to get the results you want. So we're going to teach you how to spray. We're going to teach you how to hand pack. And then we're going to, in class, we saw some of the drawbacks of hand pressing, or hand packing, because controlling your thickness is kind of difficult on a very, very tall vertical. And so we ended up with we were supposed to have an inch. We ended up with 1.25 inches in a spot, and we had to do some grinding on site to get it to fit properly. Is that a big deal? No, it's really not. However, it's something to consider. Maybe that's an instance where in a production shop you'd want to use an interform poured method. So again, it's just about understanding. Right. It's about understanding the processes and deciding what's best in your shop at that time and doing that because you know how to do it. And that's why, CCI exists to help you. That's why you can't cover everything in a 5-day class. You certainly can't cover everything in a 2-day class. And so we're there for you long term so that you can come back to us and say, okay, how would you do this? How would you do this? How would you do that? So all of that to say, and Jeff, pick up here if you want to. Like all of that to say, all of these casting methods are valid, and we want to help you learn as many of them as possible while you're here in person. But we also are available to you after the fact, so that you can, pick our brains, and so that we can help you with different techniques and methods, to make your business work the way you want it to work.
Mm-hmm. I think I think one of the reasons why direct cast has become popular, kind of getting back to this, is it's fantastically easy for a lot of simple things. When you're starting out, sure, you're going to be making countertops and flat things, so it really lends itself to that. It's fast. There's fewer mistakes, and I've heard arguments, and this is kind of like when somebody exaggerates a potential issue and create and casts it as what to expect all the time. That's just generating fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and that's a very well known manipulative technique. So for those of you who have not done spraying a GFRC mist coat, I certainly have some videos. There's videos online. You put your concrete in a hopper gun. It has no fibers in it. You spray a thin coat, and it takes a little bit of skill and attention to detail what you're doing. In the last episode, we showed the big project we did, and we sprayed the mantle and the hearth, and we had all the students who had never sprayed before. Well, a couple did. Spray, and there was a big difference.
I think everybody got a chance to spray. I'm 90% sure everybody got a chance to spray.
Yep. And I made sure that I was showing them what to do. They got a chance to watch me do it first, but everybody who's doing it, especially for the first time, has a different approach to understanding what they need to do and what they need to pay attention to. And if you step back and you look at it from a very critical standpoint, a lot of the techniques were less than perfect. But
and somebody actually asked me during the casting process, they were like,
we had curtaining, we had some spots that didn't get covered, we had start-stop lines, which we did on purpose. And yet,
well, frankly, I stepped in and did more curtaining because I like curtaining, so I did that on purpose. But
we let them know that was going to happen.
Bold
for one.
Yeah. Oh yeah, gosh, yeah. But somebody was like, "You're bold for letting this happen," and I was like, "Well, I like concrete, how it comes out,
right." Concrete that is uniform and flawless is boring. Who wants boring? Who wants stuff that looks like plastic? I can just go get Corian or Formica. If you want pinhole-free, flawless concrete with no movement, just paint it. Wasting.
I totally get the allure of the no pinholes and we can do that. It's not hard, right? But and I get the allure. Yeah, exactly. Case in point, 50 square feet of panels and no pinholes, and that's fantastic. But I also I've had people say, "Oh, wait, on my wall here in the shop, oh, that's concrete? I thought it was drywall." It's like, well, okay, because there's nothing to it. It's just I poured them.
Right.
Had I to do it over again, I probably would use a casting powder or some extra pigment or a grouting technique. There's so much life that can come to your concrete from intentionally causing voids.
Right.
And so, there's, again, validity to all of it. We wanted those panels to be right, and we wanted them to be fairly pinhole free, which they are pinhole free, because we didn't, there's an instance where you don't want to process. And again, we can do that. It's not hard. But to say that's the only method would be silly, right?
And in fact, you actually honed all those panels. We didn't leave them as direct cast, cream finish.
No.
You honed them with 400 grit and removed the cream. I'm going to say you probably removed between 75 and 80% of the cream fairly uniformly everywhere. So there's areas with little hints of cream left here and there. It's very subtle. and that makes a different, form of movement to it. But
yep.
learning how to manipulate your concrete and being aware that you can.
And then we acid etched everything too.
Yeah, the breadth of creative possibilities is huge with concrete, and a lot of those possibilities are tied to different casting methods. Whether you're taking direct caster backer or taking a face coat and putting it by hand. I mean, just take a face coat. You could spray it, you could pour it, you could trowel it, you can hand pack it, you can hand press it like Buddy does. You can mix aggregate in it and do like a terrazzo or a.
Well, I mean, we did those 6 samples with same concrete, 6 or 7 different looks, and
you have the casting powder, so create marbling. There's intentional marbling technique that you have. So there's lots of different ways to change the feel and the look of the concrete, and many of them are tied to a specific casting technique. And a lot of those casting techniques are a little slower. They are more dependent on your skill and your attention to detail. They're time sensitive. And, if you want a certain look, sometimes you have to be willing to put in the time and effort to get there. It's like, I'm not a musician, but musicians like, look, you can't be a musician overnight. You have to practice. You have to put in your chop, earn your chops, put in your time, practice, master your instrument. Well, our concrete is our instrument. And the more you work with it, the more you are adept at manipulating it and understanding not just how to get it to be what it is, but what are the costs and benefits and implications and things you have to pay attention to because of a choice you made. That's what sets a good craftsperson apart from somebody who just knows how to paint by numbers.
Absolutely. I think, Jeff, that is probably a solid place to pause for the week. I have got some things to demold and maybe some casting to do, and I'm leaving tonight at 7:45. I fly out, and I'm flying up to New England. I'm helping my good friend Jordan Smith move shops, and then I'll be back on Sunday. But we've announced our dates for the upcoming 2 workshops, GFRC and Ultimate. We are going to be putting more dates. I don't know if it'll be the whole rest of the year for 24 or not, but be on the lookout for, we've got a GFRC 2-day mastery workshop here in Canton, February 8th and 9th, which is a Thursday, Friday. And then immediately after, so following Monday, which is the 12th, we start our Ultimate Craft Concrete workshop. 5 days. We're going back to back. So, I mean, if you want like a lot of GFRC, come on, bring it on. And we've got some really exciting courses in the works, some new offerings, which Jeff and I will be excited to expound upon when they're more solidified. But we also are turning 20 next year as a company. So we've been toying with the idea of a party. So be on the lookout for some exciting opportunities to come and visit and hang out and learn some concrete and network. Again, February 8th and 9th, GFRC, February 12th through 16, Ultimate. Get out here, learn it, do it.
Come learn some craft concrete.
That's right. All right, Jeff. Well, I'll chat with you later. It was good.
Till next week, folks. Have a good one.
Next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.